Welcome to the Curdverse. I'm Lisa Kaywood, corporate functionary by day, home cheesemaker by night. This Into the Curdverse podcast grew out of a couple of years of tweeting about cheese and cheesemaking. I'd been making cheese off and on since 2013, but in December of 2018 I finally got a wine fridge where I could age my cheeses at the temperatures cheeses like best, so I started making cheese a lot more often. And when I did, I'd mention it on Twitter, like, I made a batch of kabakoo last weekend, and I'd post a picture of the cheese. And invariably, I'd get comments back like, wait, you can just make cheese? How do you make cheese? So I started live tweeting my cheese-making sessions. At first, it was just what I was doing, step by step. But then, pretty quickly, I started explaining why I was doing each of these things. Why did the milk need to be at a certain temperature? Why do I cut the curd? What are cheese cultures anyway? And my thread started getting longer and longer. And then last September, as I was making a Wensleydale, I wrote what turned into a 52-tweet thread that explained everything from the concept of milling to the relationship of cheese size to land ownership patterns. And that's when I started thinking that maybe a slightly more cohesive narrative approach might be warranted here. So there are a few other cheese podcasts out there, not many. Most of them have been done by people in the cheese industry and highlight various artisan cheesemakers, which is great if you already know your way around a cheese counter and you're looking for new things to try. But the majority of North Americans really only know the names of maybe 8 kinds of cheese, and many people I talk to are, honestly, a bit intimidated by the whole subject. Which is understandable because cheese isn't really a big part of North American culture or eating habits, and certainly not the kinds of table cheeses that are common in much of Europe. And then there are a whole lot of cheese names that are hard for English speakers to wrap our mouths around and a bunch of unfamiliar jargon, much of it, again, in French. And there's a vague sense that there must be some etiquette around how to eat cheese, like, do you cut it in chunks or wedges? Do you eat the rind? But most of us are not taught what it is, so it's all vaguely uncomfortable. So in this first season, we'll start with the basics. What exactly is cheese? Which isn't as straightforward a question as it sounds. And then we'll talk about the different kinds of cheeses and how to put together a good cheese tray. If you have a fraught relationship with dairy products, like you can eat or drink some things just fine, but not others, and you don't know why, I'll have at least one episode on how different aspects of milk can affect different individuals, so you can stop making blind guesses and hopefully find options that work for you. Along the way, we'll inevitably wind up talking about the nature of our food systems as a whole. Dairying and cheese turn out to be an excellent window into the choices we make as a society about how we grow our food, what we value when it comes to the basic task of providing sustenance to a whole population. For now, we'll mostly talk about European-style cheeses, because that's largely what's available in the cheese case of most supermarkets in English-speaking countries. But cheese didn't begin in Europe, and there are dairying and cheese-making traditions stretching all the way across Afro-Eurasia. Many of them are very ancient, far older than the European-style cheeses most English speakers are most familiar with. In fact, cheese is one of our oldest forms of processed food. I plan to explore some of those non-European types of cheese making later on, once we've got a good handle on the basic elements of turning milk into cheese. But I bring this up now because it goes right to the heart of the question, what is cheese? And a few things that Westerners tend to assume are always required for cheese aren't necessarily used at all. Sometimes you'll be told categorically that cheese has 4 ingredients: milk, microbial cultures, rennet, and salt. But the only real constant is milk. Cheese may or may not rely on any of the others to come into being. And conversely, there are cultured dairy products like yogurt and buttermilk that still contain most of their whey. Since they're colloidal and not solid, we're not going to include them in the cheese category here on this podcast. Okay, so then what is cheese? At its most basic, it's acidified milk, from which the whey has been drained from the curd. So far, so good? Okay, so then how does the milk get acidified? There are basically 2 methods, and usually only one is used in Western cheese making, but in other parts of the world sometimes they're used in combination. One is to add an acid, vinegar or lemon juice or citric acid, to fresh milk. Usually this is done after the milk is heated to a very high temperature, close to boiling. So this is often called either the direct acid method or the acid heat method. The other is to let microbial cultures loose in the milk. They feed on the sugar in the milk, and in so doing, they convert the lactose in the milk to lactic acid, which kicks off a whole bunch of other things. In other words, the milk starts fermenting. Most European-style cheeses that are cultured, so not the acid heat ones, also contain a bit of rennet to help create a strong curd structure, but not all of them do. Many cheeses outside of Europe don't use rennet at all. And in European-style cheesemaking, salt is added late in the process as a preservative. It kills some of those lactose-eating microbes, and that slows down acid production, and it also helps draw out moisture, which slows down spoilage. But in more arid regions of the world, cheeses are made small, sometimes pressed, and then quickly air-dried, sometimes without any salt at all. I'll talk more about each of those 4 not always necessary ingredients next time when we go through the basic process of making a cheese. That episode is going to be pretty info-dense, but it's important for everything else that comes after, so just bear with me. And then after that, we'll start touring the various phyla of the cheese kingdom. But for now, just remember, milk plus acid minus whey equals cheese. I hope you'll join me again next time as we once again enter the Curdverse.